Hi, everyone. This is Wissal, and I interviewed all of you for my PhD research called Racialization, Poverty, Public Housing, and Access to Post-Secondary Education. I want to begin by thanking you for your time and for sharing your lived experiences with me. In this video, I will tell you what I've done so far, what I've learned from you, and what are the next steps of this research study. I hope that you can watch till the end of the video because I would love to hear your thoughts. In terms of what I did, I spoke to 24 youth like yourself who are between the ages of 18 to 24. Most of you live in Toronto public housing or TCHC housing during the time of the interviews, but 2 of you had already moved out and 3 of you were trying to move out. All of you are racialized second-generation youth or young people who were born in Canada to immigrant parents of color. Only 1 of you was born in the United States to immigrant parents of color. 14 of you identify as Black, 3 as East and Southeast Asian, 2 as South Asian, 1 as Central Asian, 1 as Central American, and 3 of you had parents that were born in 2 different countries. For gender makeup, 13 of you identified as female and 11 identified as male. With regards to the research findings, a total of 5 themes were common and dominant in your stories of getting into college or university. In the next set of slides, I will be talking about the themes of post-secondary access and challenges in high school, post-secondary access and public housing conditions, post-secondary access in community organizations, pathways into post-secondary, and post-secondary access and social status. The first theme that came up in our conversations is related to the issues that some of you experienced while you were in high school. For example, many of you talked about personal struggles with motivation, grades, going to class, mental health issues, and being able to focus on your studies. But the more that I talked to you, the more that I realized how these personal struggles were interconnected with racist teachers at your school that made it harder for you to stay motivated, the school environment that often punished you as opposed to help you for missing classes, large class sizes that made it difficult for you to get help from your teachers, and non-existing resources at school like counseling that can give you emotional support. The examples that I just mentioned were some of the ways in which your personal struggles were interconnected with the issues that were happening at school. Unfortunately, the school administration, like the principals, didn't really resolve the issues that were happening at school. Many of you dealt with the issues that you faced in high school on your own or by connecting with other people. A lot of you spoke about connecting with some of the most amazing teachers or counselors to help you to get your high school credits. A lot of you also spoke about going to different schools, like Islamic schools, for example, or schools that were far away from public housing to get a better education. Finally, many of you spoke about the incredible support that you got from your parents, which helped you get into college or university. The second theme that I got from you is related to the impact that public housing has on your education. The second theme is divided into 2 subsections that stand for gun violence and maintenance and repairs issues in your housing. In the first subtheme, many of you talked about the issue of gun violence and gang activity in your communities. The violence that was happening in public housing did not make you feel safe because a lot of you, especially young Black men in the study, were worried about losing their lives. Your safety concerns were related to the gang wars that were happening amongst public housing communities, which made you feel targeted by other shooters in different communities. In order to protect yourself, many of you did not walk at nighttime, stayed home as much as possible, and watched your back whenever you walked into your community, for example. The violence that was happening in your community had an impact on your mental health, as many of you felt scared or jailed in your homes, as some of you had described. Some of you also talked about experiencing grief because you were sad about losing your friends, and sense of safety and freedom. TCHC did a few things to deal with gun violence in public housing, and most of you said that TCHC's work revolved around policing and securitization. They installed cameras and put security guards and police officers in your neighborhoods. In some cases, TCHC kicked people out of public housing for any criminal activity. All of you had different things to say about what TCHC was doing to make your community safer. Some of you thought that the police were a good idea because they can scare shooters away. A few of you also thought that kicking bad people out of public housing was a good idea because it can make your community safer. Others said that the police were useless because they just show up in your community and put on a show that doesn't stop gun violence. A number of you had said that the police were a bad idea because they can make you and community members feel uncomfortable. A few of you said that the police were violent and racist towards people in public housing, and especially Black folks. Some of you also said that they had bad interactions with the police in their neighborhoods. Besides policing and securitization, TCHC was working with community organizations in some public housing neighborhoods to bring about programs that can reduce gun violence. Regardless of what TCHC was doing, a lot of you said that gun violence continued to be an issue and it had an impact on your education. A lot of you talked about feeling sad about losing people to gun violence and not being able to go to school or do any of your schoolwork. Gun violence made it harder for some of you to get good grades or get all their high school credits in order to get into college or university. For this reason, many of you took it upon themselves to deal with gun violence, even though it was a bigger issue related to poverty in public housing, as some of you had told me. A lot of you talked about dealing with gun violence on their own by having a positive and strong mindset. Some of you talked about getting help from their parents, mentors, teachers, and/or counselors, while others talked about going to community organizations. The way that you dealt with gun violence helped you graduate from high school in order to get into college or university, but it didn't stop the gang wars that were happening in public housing. In the second subtheme, many of you talked about maintenance and repairs problems in your housing. The majority of you talked about maintenance issues with roaches, mice, and basement floodings, for example. A lot of you also talked about general repairs that were needed in your housing, which were related to broken doors or closets, for example. The maintenance and repairs that were needed in your housing were not fixed permanently or on time by TCHC. The way that TCHC maintained your houses had an impact on your education while you were in high school. For example, one of you talked about losing their motivation to do well in school, while another one talked about feeling more stressed because of maintenance and repairs issues. The negative impact that maintenance and repairs had on you was one of the reasons as to why you tried your best to deal with them with your families. On the flip side, some of you didn't have to deal with maintenance or repairs issues because their parents took care of everything or TCHC did a good job of taking care of their houses. The maintenance and repairs issues in your houses and gun violence in your communities was used as an excuse by TCHC to do what they call revitalization. In reality, revitalization is a fancy word for something called gentrification. In gentrification, TCHC works with politicians and construction companies to demolish public housing in order to build condos for rich people. A lot of you talked about being forced to move to another public housing neighborhood because gentrification was happening in your communities. For those that had to move, you thought it was unfair because you were going to lose important things like your sense of community or family doctor. You also thought that it was unfair because there was no guarantee that you'll be able to come back to your community once the condos were built. Gentrification was not just an issue that was happening in your community because it was happening in other places as well. Some of you talked about seeing a lot of people move into your community because construction companies were going to build condos in their area. Some of you had also said that the community's plaza and school were getting demolished for condos. The gentrification that was happening everywhere, and especially in public housing, motivated some of your community members to stand up for themselves. One of you talked about getting together with their community to stop TCHC and politicians from letting construction companies demolish their housing. Unfortunately, this person couldn't stop gentrification from happening, and they were forced to move to another public housing neighborhood. Even though gentrification happened in this one community, it didn't happen in all public housing neighborhoods. A lot of you were from one public housing neighborhood that stopped gentrification from happening. One of you told me that TCHC was planning to work with politicians to demolish their public housing, but the community didn't allow this to happen. The community stood up for themselves in the meeting that they had with TCHC, the City of Toronto, and politicians. They fought for their right to keep their public housing because it's cheap or rent geared to income housing. They also fought for their right to have maintenance and repairs issues fixed in their housing. And finally, they fought for their right to have TCHC pay for community and youth programs. After the meeting, the community was able to keep their public housing and bring about community change. TCHC continued to pay for maintenance and repairs and continued to work with community organizations to provide programs. The third theme is related to your involvement with community organizations and public housing. A lot of you went to community organizations to get the help that you need to graduate from high school and get into college or university. For example, you were able to get free tutoring and get help with applying to college or university or OSAP. The majority of you also said that they went to community organizations to have a good time. At community organizations, you were able to hang out with friends, play sports, and go to community barbecues, for example. On top of all of that, many of you were trying to make public housing a better place to live in by working with community organizations or institutions like TCHC. A few of you tried to make public housing a better place to live in by doing things on their own. A lot of you planned community barbecues or volunteered at the community's food bank, and some of you helped kids with their homework or did community cleanups. The work that you did with community organizations or institutions was mostly about bringing programs and services to the community. Most of you weren't involved in political work related to government policy, protests, or advocacy work. You also weren't given the opportunity to engage in political work with community organizations or institutions. Nonetheless, the work that you did in your community was still important because it helped you and helped others in your community. At the same time, working with community organizations helped you figure out what you want to study in college or university. On the other hand, some of you didn't go to community organizations because their programs weren't relevant to their needs. Others also said that their public housing didn't even have any community organization. The fourth theme is related to what kind of education you were getting or had already gotten from college or university. To break it down, 6 of you are already in college, 12 were studying at university, 1 of you graduated from college, and 1 of you from university. And they were both thinking of going back to school for more education. 4 of you were thinking of college and university programs and were in the process of applying or were waiting to hear back from the schools that they applied to. The majority of you got into college or university straight out of high school and didn't take any time off. But some of you took some extra time to graduate from high school because they struggled with their schoolwork or dealt with some personal issues. Some of you also struggled with the school environment because they had teachers that didn't care or teachers that were racist. For those of you that took extra time to graduate from high school, you went to alternative schools, for example, to get the help that you need to get into college or university. Most of you got into college or university from high school, but some of you took a different path to get into university. A few of you were part of something that's called the bridging program, where you can switch to university after you graduate from college, while others were thinking about bridging to university once they finished their college degree or by applying to the bridging programs from the actual college itself. Only one of you was part of a university transfer program, which allowed them to transition to university from high school. There are a lot of reasons as to why some of you took advantage of the bridging program and couldn't go to university straight out of high school. A lot of you picked the bridging program because you had low grades in high school and didn't take university level courses. Some of you thought about the bridging program because university is expensive and you wanted to get hands-on learning opportunities at college. For the last theme, the majority of you wanted to get a college diploma or university degree to have good paying jobs. You were hoping that an education would help you get out of public housing and have a better lifestyle. The way that you thought about using college diplomas or university degrees to leave public housing can be divided into 4 categories. For the first group, you said that you chose university because it was more prestigious than a college diploma. You also believed that employers were more likely to hire you if you had a university degree. The second group thought that a college diploma is better than a university degree for getting good jobs. You thought that employers were more likely to hire you because you had hands-on knowledge. In the third group, you believed that employers were more likely to hire you if you had a lot of certificates. For this reason, some of you decided to go to college and university through bridging programs or go for a master's degree. The last group didn't think there's a difference between a college diploma or university degree. You believe that getting good jobs was based on your work experience, connections in the workforce, your race, and the competitive and entrepreneurial nature of the economy. On the other hand, some of you told me that they didn't go to college or university in order to leave public housing. You wanted to stay in public housing for the time being because you liked your community. You also liked your housing because TCHC did a good job with maintenance and repairs. Finally, you wanted to continue the work that you were doing to make your community a better place to live in. For some of you, you decided to go to college and university for other reasons that had nothing to do with public housing. A few of you thought that getting a diploma or degree would make your parents proud. A few of you also said that having a diploma or degree would allow you to grow as a person and gain more knowledge. And regardless of what your reasons were, all of you believe that getting an education is important and beneficial for you. The 5 themes that I just shared with you are some of the most common and dominant themes that I found in your stories. The next steps of this research will be to analyze your stories through an anti-racist Marxist feminist theory. In the analysis, I will use theory to connect your personal struggles with larger issues related to poverty, racism, and government policies, for example. The analysis will show how your personal struggles are connected with larger and more political, social, and economic issues in society. Once I finish the analysis, I will write about your experiences of getting into college or university in my PhD dissertation. I will then use what I learned from this PhD research to try and bring about positive changes in government policy, TCHC operations, and education, for example. Thank you so much for watching till the end. I would love to hear your thoughts about this video and what I've learned so far. You are welcome to call or text me at this number. You can also email me at this address.